Fair+Grove School did not start as it is today in 2014. Today the school sits on 58 acres, has over 243,000 square feet of educational space, and accommodates over 1,127 students. The first school had one teacher, and today there are over 153 teachers, administrators, maintenance, lunchroom, drivers, staff, etc. According to the book History of Greene County, Missouri, produced in 1883 and edited by R.I. Holcomb, the first Fair+Grove School, built in 1846, was referred to as the Duke School because Mr. Chatham Duke was the first teacher. The location of the Duke School was just south of where the Bank of Fair+Grove building sits, or the Hilltop Pizza Shop is today, on the historic town square. This picture is a facsimile, not the original school. Today, sitting behind the Old Mill Flea Market on the west side of the square, or what old-timers would refer to as the MFA Exchange, sits a log building in the Fair+Grove Cemetery that was moved from the Chatham Duke homestead. The log building was used as a corn crib by Orville and Lima Eagleburger, but no one knows what the building was originally built for. However, in 1978, when the Fair+Grove Historical Society learned there was a 16-foot square log building with a porch on it sitting on the Orville and Lima Eagleburger farm, they decided to move it to the Fair+Grove Cemetery, where it sits today.
Today we're talking with Mr. Lloyd Eagleburger. Lloyd, his parents, Orville and Lima Eagleburger, purchased the farm where this building sat. Lloyd, what year did your parents buy the farm out west of Fair+Grove?
I actually bought the farm in about 1945. It was 1947 when we moved there, when my parents and us moved there.
Okay.
And the building was there at that time when we moved there, and so we used it for a log crib at that time to put corn in, you know.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And did it look similar to this at that time?
Very similar, other than the porch. This porch wasn't on it here. Yeah.
Okay. Did it have the mudded-in walls?
Yes, it did. It was just exactly like that, only not quite that good a shape, but it had the plastered-in walls, because I remember shoveling corn out of there, and we'd take them to the mill, and Dad said, "Now don't get a hunk of that plaster in there, you know,
okay.
Mess up his mill."
Okay. And did it have a roof like this?
No, it had a shingle roof. It had a cedar, I guess they call them shingles now, but it didn't have a roof similar to this on it then. And the roof just wasn't really too good at that time, you know.
Okay.
And of course, it never got any better, you know.
Okay. Also today we're talking with Mr. Dan Manning. Dan is a member of the Fair+Grove Historical Society. And Dan, what can you tell us about this building?
Well, I can tell you that when the society started in 1977, several of us were buying milk from Orville and Lima Eagleburger, Lloyd's folks, and somebody said something about the log building out there, and Orville said, "Well, that was here when we moved here," and it was this building. And he said some members of the Duke family that homesteaded that place had come out there and said that their parents, or well, great-great-grandparents, had built it before the Civil War. And so he got to thinking one thing and then another, and he said, "Well, you think the Historical Society could use that building?" And we said, "Well, probably so." And about the same time, we got a handwritten copy of a 1932 history of the village of Fair+Grove written by Will Long, who lived right over there. And in it said several things about the original school. Had been the first schoolmaster had been Chatham Duke, and that was the same Dukes that had this piece of land out here that the Eagleburgers were living on. So we kind of thought, well, if we could get that building, maybe we could move it to Fair+Grove, and maybe it would represent our first schoolhouse in Fair+Grove that had been built 1846, I think they consider that. It says that in the 1883 history of the village of Greene, or history of the Greene County, Missouri, I guess that is. But it's the history of village of Fair+Grove that Mr. Long wrote about. So we had decided that we wanted to be the trustees of the cemetery, and that's where we're standing right now. And this piece of ground didn't have any stones on it. So we thought, since the Historical Society didn't own any land, it would be all right for us to move it here, and nobody argued with us, so this is where we moved it. We disassembled it in sides out at the Eagleburger farm and laid all the logs out, and then we moved them one side at a time here with a flatbed trailer, laid them out here, and then we assembled them just the way that, only it's 180 degrees out of phase from what it was out there. This faced to the west out there, and right now the front is facing to the east.
So just be clear, because some of us, including myself, get confused. This was never a schoolhouse.
No.
As far as we know.
Right.
We really don't know that. The first schoolhouse was built over in front of where the bank is.
Yeah, right about in the middle of the square. But it represents that because we figure, and according to the description that Will Long gave, it's the same description as this cabin, and Duke probably had to do with building both of those buildings. He was the first schoolmaster, and this one came from the Duke homestead, so we kind of put it all together, and it represents the Duke School.
I see. Okay.
And apparently the second schoolhouse, which was 30 by 40 feet according to Will Long's measurements and how he described it, it stood just to the southwest of the old cemetery, and that's just over here. And it was bought by the man who owned the Bell Hotel, which is where I live, and rolled over onto his property, and he used it as a barn. Now, it wasn't there when we moved here in 1974, so sometime between 32 and 74 it was destroyed.
Okay. Well, Dan, I want to thank you for coming
bet,
by and
you bet.
visiting with us. Lloyd, appreciate
You're
you
welcome.
giving us a little bit of the history, and we're sure the folks will enjoy knowing a little bit about the history of Fair Grove Schools. Thank you very much.
Interesting enough, at the time the Duke School was moved, there was no city of Fair Grove. Again, according to the history of Greene County, it was in 1853 when C.W. Huff and H.G. Ramey, Peyton Keel, and Logan Mayfield built a storehouse, which was the beginning of commercial trade in Fair Grove. Tradition says that near the Duke School was a grove of trees and a brush arbor where Methodists and Presbyterians met. At one of the meetings, the question was asked, "What shall we name this place?" A man named William Spence suggested it be called Fair Grove after a church he had been a member of in Randolph County, North Carolina. All acquiesced, and the name has ever since remained. However, there are other versions of this story around. Today there is a Fair Grove Baptist Church located in Davidson County, North Carolina. Actually, there are 3 churches by the name of Fair Grove in North Carolina today. However, one of our 1960 graduates thinks the one in Davidson County is the one that Fair Grove, Missouri is named after. After the Civil War ended in 1866, another one-room frame schoolhouse south of the old cemetery was built. This would be the second school building. After using this building about 25 years, it became too small to accommodate the ever-increasing number of pupils, and a third school was needed. In 1891, Mr. Julius Goki sold land to the Fair Grove Methodist Church, and a church was built. At the same time, 2 acres were acquired from Mr. Goki for the purpose of building a school. This third school was completed, and the location was near where the sandstone elementary building once stood. The size of this 2-story building was 30 feet by 40 feet, and this building burned on January 3rd, 1928. At the time of the fire, I.W. Wingo was superintendent of Fair Grove Schools. The cause of the fire was a defective flue. After the fire had been detected and thought to be extinguished, the fire reignited during the next day, and the fire completely destroyed the school.
Today I'm visiting with Miss Reba Turner. Reba is one of the few people that was around when the school that burned, the Fair Grove School that burned in 1928. And she was also witnessed the fire of 1954 when the Rock School building. So she has one of the best ideas of what the schools that those buildings look like that we could run across. Reba, what year did you start school?
I started in 1924.
Started in 1954?
24.
24, yeah, 1924. And what building did you start the school in?
I started in the Tracy Sullivan House, which is just back of where I grew up.
Okay, and that would be just south of
The
the...
Methodist Church, or the school here.
And in what grade did you move to the wooden schoolhouse, the one that burned in
I was in the
54?
3rd grade when it burned.
Okay. And can you describe for us how that building was laid out? How many floors and?
Well, there was 2 floors, but how many rooms, you know, a 9-year-old, a 3rd grader don't pay much attention to that. But to my knowledge, the elementary and 1st, 7th, 8th grades was downstairs, and the high school was on the 2nd floor.
Okay. And how was it heated?
It was heated with a great big pot-bellied stove, and it had a great big cover around it. And the flue went clear up to the 2nd floor and then across to the west wall where the chimney was.
Okay.
And that's where the fire started.
And I understand that's building burned in 1928, and after it burned, you would have been in the 3rd grade. After it burned, what?
We moved back down to where I started the school.
Back in the.
And then out.
And how long were you down there?
Well, we finished out that year. I started the 4th grade in the new building.
Okay. And that would have been the starting of the 1928-29 year. Whenever that fire started, where were you at that time?
You mean the old building?
The old building.
Well, I was in the classroom there on the 1st floor, and the fire started on the west side. That's where the flue was, and it started one day, had a flue fire, and they put it out, and then it rekindled the next day because it was bitter cold, and it really had a hot fire, and that big old stove, that's the only heat they had.
Okay. Then in 1928, that fall, and they had the new rock building built, and it was
I think it was completed, and we started the school that fall. Because we didn't start the school until after Labor Day in September then.
Mm-hmm. And it was located just south of where the later elementary building, if those people remember where that was at. It was south of there. And how was that school laid out?
How was it laid out? Well, it was 3 stories, basement, 1st floor, and 2nd floor. And the restrooms and furnace room and everything was in the basement.
In the basement.
Mm-hmm.
And were there classrooms down there?
There was 2, because most of it was the gymnasium, the big gym on the south.
Okay. And did it have a cafeteria when it opened up?
No.
How many years was it before that cafeteria was built down there?
You know, I really don't know, but they took one of the classrooms and made a cafeteria.
Mm-hmm. I can remember going to that cafeteria my first couple of years.
It's probably been in the 30s, don't you think? Well, yeah, late 29 or 30, 31.
Whenever they built that, you're saying? Yeah.
No, when they had started the first lunch school, lunchroom.
Yeah. And then that school burned in 1954. Do you remember that fire?
Yes, very much.
What were you doing whenever
I was dressing chickens.
Okay.
On my back porch, and I happened to look out. Of course, I lived just a mile and a half east of the school there, and I could see it real plain, and I see the smoke rolling, and I knew there was a fire.
Okay.
So,
in 1928, the Fair+Grove district, now having become a consolidated district with other schools around Fair+Grove, including Cedar Bluff, east of Fair+Grove, Womack, south of Fair+Grove, Elm Spring, to the southwest of Fair+Grove, and High Point, or Windy Hill schools, west of Fair+Grove. With the need of a new school in 1928, the district approved bonds of $30,000 to build the 4th building that was second to none in the county. It had 15 classrooms, a gymnasium, and 2 large halls with 8 bubbling sanitary drinking fountains, was lighted by electricity, and had steam heat. At this time, the Fair+Grove school system was sending school buses as far south as Green Lawn Cemetery. This building burned November 13th, 1954 during a roof repair. At the time of the fire, the building served as the high school, but only hosted the high school cafeteria. During the remainder of 1954 and 1955, the Vocational Agriculture and Vocational Arts building, which had been completed in 1945, was used for additional classroom space. Also, the Methodist Church was used to house the band classroom and also the cafeteria. Thanks to the church for being so gracious to those of us who were in school at the time. The school yearbook, or annual, which is the source of much of the information in this script, was first produced in 1948. Not much information has come to the attention of the writer for the years of 1929 to 1954. However, one such picture was found of the graduating class of 1937. It just happens that the two of the oldest attendees to the alumni banquet, Reba Yandall Stewart and Vesta Wiseman McInnes, happened to have graduated that year. In 1956, a new high school and junior high school was completed with 8 classrooms, a new cafeteria, and what for those who were around at the time thought was a huge gymnasium. No school is complete without teachers and administrators. There have been many great teachers, administrators, custodians, and bus drivers. However, there are a few who spent the better part of their adult lifetime at Fair Grove, and the history of Fair Grove would not be complete without the mention of their names. Mrs. Ethel Hauk served faithfully for 39 years as teacher, counselor, and a friend. Miss Dorothy Patterson taught second grade for many years, but the exact number has not been determined, but at least 30 years and retiring in 1976. Mrs. Blanche Carter Mason has the longest tenure that we found and taught typing in business classes for 45 years. Also in 1956, the first year in a new gymnasium, the Fairgrove boys basketball team won the Marshfield Regional Tournament and went to the state tournament held at Columbia, Missouri. The last year for Mr. Winsey Marsh to serve as superintendent was 1956, and 1957 was the first year for Mr. Lewis Taylor to serve as superintendent of schools. The new elementary school was completed in 1958 and was used in conjunction with the old elementary school, which was completed circa 1945. The year 1959 was marked by the retirement of one of Fairgrove's longtime cooks, Mrs. Ruth Schwarzenbach, retired after many years as one of the school's cooks. The senior class had 33 graduates. There was a senior class play in 1959, but they didn't know what it was going to be called when the annual was put together, or they forgot to tell Winston McMillan, the Eagle editor. The 1960 senior class play was Campus Quarantine. There were 39 graduates in this year. The graduating class of 1961 had 40 members and started the year calling themselves the Sophisticated Seniors. The senior class play was Look Behind You. The year was marked by a slight disturbance involving where lunches could be consumed. If you want details on this event, just ask any member of the 1961 class. Mr. John Ewing completed his last year as Fairgrove superintendent in 1961. The 1961 and 62 school year began with a new superintendent, Mr. Robert Thomas. The senior class had 31 graduates. There is no mention of a senior class play in the 1962 annual, so the writer assumed the class had too many bad actors. After serving many years, this was the final year for Mr. Charlie Farmer to serve as custodian. Mr. Clifford McMillan served with Mr. Farmer for many years. The class of 1963 had 29 graduates. The senior class play was Lock, Stock, and Lipstick. The class motto was Find a Path or Make One. The class of 1964 had 40 graduates. Katie Chapman was elected Eagle Queen, and Joni Hill was elected Eagle King. Joetta Jeffries was the Drum and Bugle Corps Majorette. Each year at the alumni banquet, classes that are celebrating their 50th year after graduation are recognized. This year, we recognized the class of 1965, which had 46 graduates.
Also today, I'm visiting with Mr. Larry Allball, and he was the senior class president of the class of 65. And each year at the alumni banquet, we take the time to celebrate the classes that are celebrating 50 years of graduation. So that's why we have Larry here today, and thank you, Larry, for taking time out of your work schedule. I understand you're still working.
Yes, very actively working.
50 years ago, whenever you graduated, what did you anticipate that you might be doing at this time?
Well, I can honestly say I wasn't sure, but I had at that time committed to a training program at St. John's Hospital for X-ray technologists, So that was my immediate thought process. I must confess I simply didn't think very far out into the future.
Okay. Well, I don't think you're too different from everybody else. What is the most memorable thing that happened in the class of 1965?
Well, I've checked with several of my classmates, and unfortunately no one could come up with anything grander than a senior trip we took that year to a lake that had a very crazy name to me called Lake Ten Killer in Oklahoma. And apparently we went to a town called Gore, Oklahoma, which is close to that lake. And one of my classmates points out that it was a dude ranch, and she puzzled about why country kids would go to a dude ranch, but that was a nice experience at the lake.
Okay. And I understand that there was actually 39 graduates in the class of 65. Have any of those class members passed on?
They have, and I have a list. I can't give you the time frames when they passed. I do want to point out that one of our classmates, whose name is Jack Goss, although we knew him always as Scrappy, I'm sorry to say perished within less than a year of our graduation. He had joined the Marines and he died in Vietnam. But I'd like to give you the list that, as I know it.
Okay.
Don Lucas, Ronnie McCurry, Donnie Rebold, Ron Dickens, and Danny Jakes, I believe also was in our class and has perished.
Okay. Well, thank you for mentioning those names. We want to recognize them
Certainly.
from your class, and everyone here has enjoyed a bit of this history of the class of 65, and I appreciate you coming over and sharing with us today.
You're very welcome. Thank you.